What's going on out there, crypto land? My name is Phil. This is the Fun with Crypto podcast. We are in season 2 and this is episode 15. We have another interview today. We are going to be interviewing none other than John Carvalho, who on Twitter is at Bitcoin Error Log. I hope you guys enjoy the discussion because John and I kind of went all over the place, and I had a really great time talking with him. He is really well-spoken and very smart, and I appreciate his views on just Bitcoin and money, and just really, to me anyways, an all-around cool guy. So I'm super happy that he took the time to do this podcast with me. So without further ado, here's my interview with John Carvalho, Bitcoin Error Log.
Hello.
Hey, John.
How's it going?
I'm good. How about you?
Pretty good.
All right. So yeah, I did the test recording. It worked great. And so this is the Fun with Crypto podcast, and I'm Phil, and I am joined today by no other than Bitcoin Error Log, John Carvalho. And before we get into anything, I just want to say that I only actually learned about you through the Lightning Trust chain. So I had been in the space for, maybe at this point now we'll say close to 3 years. But and I actually didn't realize at the time that video with you and Roger, like I didn't realize that was you. So when I got introduced to you anew, but I was at a different place at that time. In terms of crypto, I was a total shitcoiner, and I had no idea what I was doing. All I was doing was basically moving Bitcoin onto exchanges and, buying the next faster thing. It's going to be faster. It's going to be better. It's more decentralized. So, and so I didn't understand good content and kind of like objective arguments to, why shouldn't we have a different coin? But anyways, so yes, I only learned about you again on the Lightning Trust chain, and then after that, I started to follow you, and I really I like your posts. Like you're blunt and you're to the point, but I also feel that you're fair and objective. And to me, that's like that. I'd rather, you know what I mean? It's like I'd rather get hit with the stick and know that what I'm doing is wrong than somebody just lead me along with the carrot and not let me know that what I'm thinking is wrong.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much my theme. Is like from my very first day in Bitcoin, pretty much I noticed that there was a lot of scamming and a lot of scamming opportunists and things like that. So I do my best to kind of take a hard line on risky behavior and things like this, because I know this kind of like a whole initiation process almost every Bitcoiner goes through, and that every cycle, every bull bear cycle, we get new blood, and then everybody's competing to basically get the money from that new blood. And in the end, I'm just trying to, somebody made a good observation at one point. I was on a rant about how I felt like everybody, I'm watching a bunch of children running around in a field of balloons, and they all want to grab these balloons and float off into the atmosphere, and I'm just trying to keep them on the ground. And then somebody pointed out to me that, like, hey, you're basically the catcher in the rye over here, like in crypto. And I was like, you know what? I went back and I had read the book when I was really young, and I didn't really remember the reference. So I looked up and I was like, wow, it's like pretty much the same explanation. I'm just trying to stop people from falling off the cliff,
Yeah, I definitely appreciate it. And I think that message definitely comes out loud and clear. So, of course, when I started talking to you and everything, and then you accepted to do this, this discussion interview with me, I had to go back and watch that interview with you and Roger Ver. And of course, I don't really want to go into detail into it because you've already gone into detail so many times. But my wife, who actually knows really very little about crypto, was sitting there listening to this and knows like not as much as about Bitcoin. And, her impression was she's like, wow, she's like, this guy knows his stuff. I'm like, so, and I know like not all of us, we don't all know everything. But I mean, you could really see that, you had prepared and you knew exactly where he was going to go with that, and it was really well done. And then from that, I moved on to the YouTube video with you, Shinobius, who's now the secret Blockstream employee, and Vinny Lingham. So I actually work for a company that uses the Civic API. Okay, so I have
Nice.
great. So I have a little bit of experience with this, and I can say for a fact that you don't need that token to use that product. So for me, as soon as and it's funny, right? The day that our company agreed to work with them to use their identity solution, I started to do research, and I get to actually test some of the product that that interfaces. It's a visitor management solution that we have that interfaces. And they don't, we don't need to, as a corporation, we don't need to own their token in order to use that product.
Well, this was the thing that this goes back maybe 2 years now, when the whole ICO utility token craze started, and Civic was kind of early on that. But there was this rash of people that were trying to rationalize ICO behavior for their already existing projects. A lot of ICOs were just kind of scams or fantasies people had about things they wanted to build. But then as people watched people raise a bunch of money, they were like, well, shit, I mean, why am I trying to get VCs and doing pitch decks when I could just go out there and make a token and make an excuse for having a token and raise a bunch more money? And so companies like Civic and Tyrion and people like this kind of, forced in some kind of excuse to have a token within their scheme for their platform. But the problem always remained that why the hell would any user or business want a token as an actual utility that had a variable price?
Yeah.
Sorry, my audio cut out for a second.
Oh yeah, there you are. Okay.
Your business, why would they ever want to or want to have to deal with having Civic tokens to be able to use that service when they don't know how many hits or queries or whatever it is they charge you by in Civic? Why would they want that token if they didn't know how many they were going to get for it?
No, exactly. I mean, don't get me wrong, but nowhere do we use that token. And to your point, as I started to see that happen, I realized, I started to go and look at a lot of these other projects, and I'm like, holy crap, this is all the same thing. It's a lot of this is just the same thing. What happens is that from that point, if you choose to accept the information that's in front of you, you start to realize you're like, well, wait a second, if I'm going to hold anything, I may as well be holding Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is actually being what it's intended to be. It's doing what it's supposed to do, whereas these other projects, they're not actually doing what they're supposed to do. They're just a piece of software that don't require any kind of coin to do what they need to do.
Exactly. Yeah, this was I don't know if you were around or paying attention back when Bitcoin Uncensored was a video, a vodcast that used to be very popular before the last bull run, leading into it really. But it was two people that did the show, and Junseth and Chris DeRose, and then they split up. But before they split up, the show was awesome, and they were kind of, some of the loudest voices of reason regarding stuff like this about ICOs and using blockchain for things that, just didn't need a blockchain. And it's still a problem. I mean, the blockchain quote unquote industry is still pretty huge, and we still have a lot of large corporations, and now we have banks, and everybody's saying they're doing blockchain, but they're pretending like you couldn't just normally do this stuff with database structures and networking and normal money. It's hard because everything is so hard to explain to people, and it's hard to, and you have like these reputable quote unquote large businesses and experienced businessmen disagreeing with people like me, and people are like, why should I believe you? You're just being a maximalist. You're just being crazy. Oh
yeah, absolutely. But you know what it is, to your point, it's they just need to understand something simple. And they don't want to understand Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin is too much of a monster. It's too much of its own thing. But blockchain, I can take that and I can make it my own.
Yeah.
I can. So
yeah. Earlier you said something that you said, oh, I watched the Roger Ver interview and it sounded like you really knew your shit, etc. But the thing is like, as if any real Bitcoiner, I think, I should just speak for myself, but you always feel this kind of creeping ignorance because everything is always moving so fast and it's so intricate and there's so much new technology. There's so much detail to how the Bitcoin network works since day one to just understand it. And so I just try to do my best to understand things and explain things on a conceptual level and keep things about concepts and about, first principles and such, because getting into the weeds about details, like things like how right now, like Peter Razoon is trying to like troll everybody with all of the bad things about the Lightning Network.
Yes.
He just drags everybody into the weeds and he's trying to unlearn the concepts that people did learn and cause doubt. It's literally FUD, because it's too complicated for anybody to actually understand without like being a cryptographer and being one of the developers of Lightning Network. And those people are too busy actually doing work to like dispel the dumb things that he's saying.
That's right. And instead, we're all stuck on Twitter listening to it. So,
yeah.
It's like, because I mean, don't get me wrong, I am definitely not technical enough to argue with him at his level, to be able to explain back why what he's saying makes no sense. But I leave it to the more intelligent people to ignore him. So I figure if they're not paying him any attention, then that's fine. But I do want to go back to something that you mentioned. You're absolutely right. The more I learn about Bitcoin, the dumber I feel about Bitcoin, because like what happens is that it makes you aware of your ignorance. It's like, it's almost like it's a mirror showing you everything you don't know, So it's like you'll see the piece that you do know, and then all you'll see around it is what you don't understand. So.
And then sometimes you'll think you knew something, with a lot of confidence, and then somebody will take the time to explain to you how it actually works, and then you realize that it's actually kind of, in a way, you could say it's the opposite of what you thought. Like, I don't know, I can't think of a good example offhand, but one example is like how people like to say Bitcoin is peer-to-peer money, and how in reality, there isn't actually a peer-to-peer aspect when you're transacting with people. It's like more like we're all organizing who has control, which keys have control over UTXOs in a central database that has been dispersed decentrally. So there's not an actual peer-to-peer transaction at all. And so you get into a debate with somebody like Roger Ver, and it's like he's saying, Bitcoin Cash is actually peer-to-peer, and you're like, what the hell are you talking about?
It's like, no, it's not. But you know what? To your point, there's actually a really interesting comment that Shinobius made on Block Digest that has to do exactly with what you're saying. Bitcoin is not a voting mechanism; it's a coordination mechanism, and like that's exactly what it is. Like, to your point, it's like we're all working together in order to cooperate and organize, but it's not a peer-to-peer as in a literal peer-to-peer.
Yeah. And you can do this with like most of the qualities of Bitcoin. We can talk about Bitcoin fungibility, and we can say, okay, is Bitcoin fungible? Well, on a very, very, very technical level, it is, because one Satoshi equals one Satoshi on the network. The network can't tell them apart in the abstract sense.
That's right.
But the actual job of the blockchain is literally to manage the difference between every Satoshi. So it's literally to keep, like, the UTXO set literally keeps track of which Satoshis are separate and different than other Satoshis. So in practice, it can't ever be fungible, on a technical level. So it's like you can do this with so many qualities of Bitcoin, where you can be a devil's advocate and totally, blow someone's mind or troll someone with just by explaining how things are the opposite of what people think they are.
Oh my gosh. No, you're absolutely right. And actually to that point, you made a comment recently that going on Bitcoin's qualities, that it really kind of rung true with me, was that Bitcoin wants to be free. And I really, it kind of struck a chord with me because, think of it like water is the same thing. It follows the path of least resistance. And if you look at Bitcoin, Bitcoin reduces friction, which to me is, I guess I'm kind of making analogies, but Bitcoin is the same type of thing. I think it's going to follow the path of least resistance.
I mean, my concept of saying Bitcoins want to be free just comes from a really abstract observation of having been here for 6+ years. It's just that I see in so many ways, and this isn't like a technical thing. This isn't anything scientific that I can put into, a good explanation, but I know it's true. I know Bitcoins want to be free. I know they're hard to hold. I know I know the more of them you have, the more they want to be set free. Like, it's just, there's like a gravity. There's a gravity to them, and that gravity definitely is some kind of force that makes people want to take them from you. And then once you have them, they want to get away from you, and it's just a weird phenomenon.
I completely agree. It's like I've only recently began to make Bitcoin happy to stay with me.
Yeah. It's hard. It's the hardest. It's the funniest thing is it's the most valuable lesson in Bitcoin, and it's the simplest lesson in Bitcoin, but it's still the hardest fucking lesson of all of them. Just to hold. Just take whatever money you are saving, put it in Bitcoin, and hold, and get on with your life.
That's it.
That's it. That's all you have to do.
It's true, and it's so difficult.
But everybody is trying to find out when to buy, when to sell, who to listen to, what chart to look at, which shitcoin to trade. Oh, I can trade shitcoins to make more Bitcoins. Everybody's trying to put their Bitcoin to work, lend it, etc. But like in the end, like the one time you make a mistake and get fucked, assuming it's only one time because you're lucky if it's only one time, it undoes all of the upside of any amount of Bitcoin you may have had if you had just held on for years. I've been here 6 years and I'm not a millionaire. So that to me, what does that tell you? That tells you that even though I saw Bitcoins when they were worth $10, that normal behavior, normal life, the average person is incapable of holding Bitcoins that long.
I totally agree. I completely agree. And it's exactly true. I swear to you. I mean, when I first got into Bitcoin, it had nothing to even do with investment. It was for utility. It was for purpose. Like, I found it interesting. I liked the tech. And on top of that, it fulfilled a requirement that I needed. It's like that couldn't be done in any other way. And it's like, and then all of a sudden I found an exchange and I found all these shit coins. And then it became, hey, wait a second, I can make more Bitcoin. and that is so not true. Like, had I have just kept accumulating, I'd have more Bitcoin today than I would have ever had.
Yeah, one thing I like to ask people, like, I have a meetup that I host here, and one thing I like to ask people that are really like hardcore shitcoiners, I say, you don't have to tell me the number, but think of the most amount of Bitcoin you ever had, and tell me if that moment is now or not. And the answer is never that it's now. They always had more Bitcoin at some point in the past.
Absolutely.
So like, yeah, if you're lucky or if you're a really good trader, and even that I'm not sure is true, because eventually even some of the great traders I've met and known, eventually they get fucked too in one way or another. Their exchange gets hacked, or they accidentally send too much Bitcoin to the wrong address, or, just things happen, and the truth is just, the safest thing, the most sane thing you can do is figure out how to be a productive human, take what the skills you're good at, get a good job, make sure you get what you're worth, continue to increase your skills so you can earn and put value into the world and convert that value into Bitcoin.
So I think you make a very interesting point about what you just said about holding, forget about it, and go be a productive human, because that's one of you had mentioned, the effects of Bitcoin disruption. I don't remember if you were talking with Vlad. It was like one of your recent podcasts maybe, but I think it has to do with that. And right now, and again, I could be totally wrong and you could call me on it, but regardless, Bitcoin aside, deleveraging and all of this inflation has kind of like made us like a society of shitcoiners, right? Like we're just like a whole bunch of people that, traded quality for quantity of garbage product. Inferior, cheap product because our money is cheap, so we can't actually get quality. So Bitcoin actually has this disruptive kind of effect where I believe it's going to incentivize a flight to quality, and we're going to possibly become less consumers, but what we will consume will be much higher quality items and experiences and and such, because it's going to be more difficult to separate yourself from your Bitcoin. I could tell you I have it's like I don't want to spend my Bitcoin. Like I remember for something like when we did the Lightning Trust Chain and you did those awesome, you chose to help everybody out with like the shirts and everything and, do something cool for everybody that would be memorable. Like, man, like that to me was worth getting rid of a small amount of, Bitcoin to spend in the network for something memorable. So to me, like that was like a higher quality type of experience. And I was willing.
I mean, and I think there's a couple concepts here. One is, with the shirts and the trust chain, I think that part of it was like, we all like to be a part of something, and anybody that participated in that felt like they were a part of something. And that's probably the biggest reason why I didn't want to take the profits from those selling those items, the shirts and mugs and stuff, is because I knew that it was just kind of exploiting this community aspect, and that I didn't build it. It wasn't my the whole phenomenon had nothing to do with me. I participated, and that's about it. And I knew that everybody would want it, and I knew that I knew that it would be the most popular item that I had put in the store so far. And I just thought, maybe if people buy a few other things, I'll make a couple bucks and that'll be enough. But the other concept that you were mentioning, that a higher quality and that you don't want to spend your Bitcoins, I'll go back to what I was just saying, which is I don't think there's a problem with spending Bitcoin. I don't think, I think we do have to balance living our lives and living a good life, because that's what makes all this so valuable, is that our time here is limited, and that we have mortality, and money is just using work to convert our mortality into money. I mean, work, sorry, I'm bumbling around, but you get the idea. Basically, we have a short time here, and you do have to live your life, and you do have to live a happy life. And I think that it's okay to spend your Bitcoin. I just think that if you pair that with the concept of just always making sure any amount of money that you don't need to spend in the short term or within your normal capital inflow is in Bitcoin, that you're going to be okay. Like Bitcoin will take care of you if you take care of your Bitcoin.
Oh, I totally agree. I completely agree. Here, you know what? We're gonna switch. We're gonna change the flow a little bit, and I just wanted to talk about your. So I went and I saw that you work at Bitrefill, is it?
Correct.
Okay, and I want to make sure I got this right. You're the CCO.
Correct.
Okay, cool. So am I allowed to ask like what you do or what that is, or?
Sure. Basically, I'm the person managing communications related things there. So marketing, advertising, some product stuff, some business development stuff, just mostly communications related. It's Chief Communications Officer is what CCO stands for. I started there in early December, I think, if I recall correctly. So it's been about 3 months.
Cool.
And basically, I'm trying to be somebody that's pulling the company forward as it's growing, helping to be somebody that's has some experience in the Bitcoin world, and helping. We all just had a 2-week work retreat in Spain where we all met up because we're scattered around the world, so we met up to work together for 2 weeks, and so we were doing a lot of planning about what we're going to do for our roadmap for the rest of the year, planning about what we're going to do about this whole Lightning Network thing, which has become a much bigger force than I think the company had realized that it would be maybe a year ago. But overall, I love it, man. I love this work. I love what we have planned, and I'm happy to be part of a company that actually is helping, people that are in not just Bitcoin, but other cryptos too, give them a way to, give them an off ramp that is actually useful to make them not have to keep converting to fiat.
That's right. No, I think it's fantastic. And I definitely I look forward to I saw some of your announcements that there's some really cool stuff coming down the line, so I look forward to the the development from Bitrefill, because I really I always try to find Bitcoin companies doing things for Bitcoiners, and I just think it's really important. Like, to me, it's when you look at all these other type of these garbage projects and stuff like that are really just self-serving, it's nice to see somebody trying to, or I shouldn't say trying, but actually building something on top of the actual the actual ecosystem that was meant to be there. Not some weird mutant supplant.
Yeah, I mean, I still do, I guess, talk about Coinbase a lot, and I feel like every Bitcoin or crypto business has a choice to make. They can make Bitcoin their biggest enemy, or they can make it their best friend. And it's really hard for a business to not choose to make Bitcoin their worst enemy. Even the Bitcoins that support Bitcoin, and you'll see this all the time. Over the years, you see companies that, oh, we're switching from Bitcoin to Litecoin. We're switching from Bitcoin to Bitcoin Cash. We're switching from. We're not going to bother, incorporating Segwit or Lightning or any of these things. We're just going to keep adding more and more and more and more shitcoins, and they end up hating Bitcoin, even though it's like the only thing that allows them to exist in the first place. And it's a real paradox, and I think that Bitrefill as a company is doing its best to just, be a company that is aligned with Bitcoin. We're not huge, we're maybe 15 people or so. So we can only do so much. But hopefully we will continue to grow. We've had a pretty good year so far, and I think things look good. So hopefully we can continue to grow and be a bigger force for helping Bitcoin grow as well in the Lightning Network.
Well, I think you guys have, we're right at the beginning. So, and seeing the way that you communicate and stuff like that, I personally have no doubt, that you guys are going to do great things. So, but, hold on a second. Where is it? Okay. I want you to, there was something that you mentioned. And again, I don't know if it was on Vlad's podcast, but you mentioned the idea of, and I really like this. It was small stories, small wins. And
I said that.
Yeah. See, it's like, man, I had a 2-hour conversation. I totally don't remember saying that. Yeah, but you had mentioned small stories and small wins. Essentially that Bitcoin was the accumulation of these small stories and small wins, all around, that eventually make it into this, this kind of ecosystem that we all exist in.
I suppose so. I mean, there's a lot of different fragments to the community, especially now there's a whole separate side of Bitcoin with the Lightning community, and those developers are, seemingly forming a whole extra arm on the Bitcoin network. And so, yeah, I mean, you have a lot of people doing small things and doing their own efforts and businesses and communities and tribes and things like this, and it all makes up the greater ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. It just kind of struck a chord with me because it really does feel that way, you know? Like we have like a little meetup at work, you know, with like 5 or 6 people. Like I know that there's like you just mentioned before, you do a meetup. If you don't mind me asking, how many people are you
It depends. In the summer,
on average?
I would say it's maybe 15 to 20. In the winter, it's more like 5 to 10.
You see what like exactly like I think that totally illustrates the small stories, small wins type of narrative.
Although what I
Like
should say is lately I've been I have a friend here that has asked me to moderate and participate in a couple meetups at a local co-working place called Tech Hub, and there it's more of a presentation format, and a lot more people come to those.
oh,
We'll
cool.
see 20 to 50 people on average, somewhere in that range. But I think the difference is that it's like a more professional setup. Whereas when I do my meetups, it's just meeting up at a restaurant and hanging out. So I think that what the crowd is telling me is people want presentations. They want to consume information that's delivered to them, and less people are looking for just a place to hang out with other Bitcoiners.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that because the type of hangout that we do at work is, we discuss different concepts in Bitcoin, but um, I'd say that when one of us picks a topic and we decide to present the topic, people are more engaged,
Yeah.
like instead of just the general chat. So I do agree. Um, okay, you also said something that I found interesting as well. Um, all money is a Ponzi, a consensus Ponzi. And I I have to obviously agree because once you actually understand what money is, you realize that it has no actual value regardless of what it is without people.
hmm Well,
So
I've also said similarly that Bitcoin is people.
exactly.
Sometimes people on Twitter, for example, or online in general, they get into these really specific arguments or really hard line arguments about things, and I just feel like sometimes whether I agree with either side or not, I'm just like, come on, guys, like in the end, this is actually for humans.
No, you're absolutely right, and
You can't be too clinical about this.
no, you're absolutely right. I think it's, but
Yeah.
I think it's the way you illustrated it, the way that you said it. It's like it was very simple, and anybody who actually has a grasp an understanding of what money truly is at its core will understand what you're saying is correct.
Yeah, I mean, money. Well, this is why Bitcoin Maximalist exists, somewhat ironically, is because they understand that money is basically a Ponzi. It's not, I'm using the term Ponzi loosely because Ponzi is literally a scheme where there's one man at the top that redistributes money to people below him until there's no money left for everybody, and he takes a profit and while he does it. But the difference with cryptocurrency is it's a headless Ponzi. It's a Ponzi for the people, is what I say. And so there's nobody at the top that can centrally manipulate everybody, and so it makes it easier for us all to agree on one money. And maximalists, they basically they understand this concept, and they say, well, why would we ever want to agree on more than one money then? Because it would be a lot more efficient for everybody, and what if we all cooperate and choose the same money to believe in?
No, you're exactly. That is exactly well said. It's very true, and obviously when I heard it, it just obviously struck a chord with me. Okay, so there is something I definitely want to get your opinion on, and it's okay if you don't want to discuss it, but it has to do with the introduction of because you made a tweet that I wish I would have printed it out, but introducing interest into the BTC base layer, or I shouldn't say interest, but inflation. And I saw that you were tweeting last night about somebody was talking about like inflation emission, and I think like so. Okay, we obviously all agree there's a 21 million cap. I personally don't think there ever needs to be more than that ever. I don't have a problem with a unit becoming worth more. I think that's what makes sense. But for some reason, there seems to be this like underlying current that I see where it's like there's like this pocket of subversion where they're trying to introduce inflation into the base layer through privacy. Like we're going to need privacy on the base layer, and by doing that, we can obstruct that 21 million, that 21 million cap. Have you heard about that, or?
Yeah, so you're making me want to talk about a few topics.
Sorry.
One, it goes back to the last two things we talked about, which are that Bitcoin is for humans. Now I'm forgetting my train of thought here. It's too much to parse.
Sorry.
That Bitcoin is for humans, and they are just okay. Let me back up.
No, don't worry. I'm sorry.
Let me cover one thing at a time. With the inflation aspect, last night I was sort of trolling. I don't actually want Bitcoin to inflate, and I don't really care. It is what it is, and I think that because we don't know, have any definitive way to choose a better answer, that we should really not bother trying to solve this problem that doesn't actually exist. Everybody wants to cause FUD and say, oh, if Lightning works, then there won't be enough fees on the base layer, or if the block reward halves too quickly, there won't be enough rewards for miners to keep the chain secure. And the thing is this is
all bull.
Yeah, it's all bull because it's not asking the right questions, and it's not thinking of like the way that markets and supply and demand actually work. Bitcoin will always have enough miners based off of the function of what the actual trading prices. So it doesn't matter how many Bitcoins are being emitted, because they're going to have to be worth enough in proportion and in tandem with the amount that people value that Bitcoin. So if the network is worth $1 trillion or $10 trillion, there's going to need to be enough miners to make that valuable, and they're going to charge high enough fees to justify that. And if miners have to charge too high of fees for people, then the price of the market cap will go down if people don't want to pay that. So it's like, you can't say the fees will be too high, because there's no such thing as the fees being too high, because if people are paying that fee, it's not too high.
Exactly. I totally agree.
I know it sounds weird probably to some people listening, but it's the truth. Like, if the fee is $25 to do a Bitcoin transaction, that's because that's the market value of a Bitcoin transaction. Ultimately, it was volatile and it was noise the last time it happened. It didn't stay that high, but so I think someday it may be that Bitcoin transactions are that high on the base layer. What else did I want to say about inflation? I said I wanted to go back to the other points about Bitcoin being for humans. The thing about talking about inflation is that Bitcoin is going to be emitting for many, 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 many years. I might be dead before it's done. I forget what year it ends. I'll definitely be dead. I think it ends in a long time.
Both of us are.
Yeah. And so if I'm going to be dead by the time the Bitcoins are done being printed, that means I'm never going to live in a world where Bitcoin is truly deflationary. There are always going to be Bitcoins printed in my face,
That's right. So we actually won't even see the full spectrum.
So that makes the real question, what should the rate of emission be? That nobody is asking this question, and maybe we don't. Maybe a more interesting question isn't whether we should increase inflation, whether we should add more coins or increase emission. Maybe it's more interesting just to ask: should we smooth it out? Should it not be every 4 years? Is that a bad design thing that we only have every 4 years? Maybe we should, reduce by 20% every X years or whatever the same proportion is, so it's smoother. Maybe it will have less boom and boom cycles, and the volatility will be more on a steady upward trend instead of huge up and huge down. I just think that the whole conversation about inflation is silly, and I don't see any intelligent conversation around it. It just seems like, there's ulterior motives where people want to either cause FUD, or there's another phenomenon with people that come into Bitcoin. I know a guy named John Seth, the other guy from the Bitcoin Uncensored podcast that used to be, both of them. He made a meme that has a picture of Space Ghost, and it says, "I'm new to Bitcoin and I'm here to fix it." and and it's just basically like, everybody that when they come into the Bitcoin world, they get so I don't know, inspired, I guess, to put it in a good way. They get so inspired by everything that they've just been faced with that they want to get their hands dirty, and they want to make Bitcoin better, and they want to make their own shitcoin, or like they get inspired and they feel like they need to participate. And I think that's partly what it is sometimes. Sometimes it's just innocent and it's not an actual ulterior motive. It's just that people feel like they have some kind of they discovered Bitcoin, and so that means they have some kind of special ability to make it better. And I just think it's not an interesting conversation to me to talk about changing the inflation. To go back to your point about privacy, yes, this is something I don't have a stance on it either way yet. Talking like a politician, but in the past I have mentioned this. I have mentioned how whether or not I have a blog post about Bitcoin fungibility, if it's really fungible or not. And one of the things I bring up is that having a, for lack of a better term, human readable blockchain history makes people that don't know anything about cryptography or know only a minimal amount, it gives them a way to kind of check things, or they can have a little more faith that things are working when things aren't hidden. And if we just start hashing everything into hashes and trees and more hashes and more trees and start obfuscating everything, if there's ever a bug, only the highest level cryptographers are going to be able to find it or catch it or exploit it. And so if things become hidden, that means they could theoretically be hidden in such a way that inflation could increase, where coins could be printed. We saw this with Zcash, right?
That's right.
They had some kind of exploit where they claim it wasn't actually exploited, but they actually don't have a way to prove that it wasn't exploited.
Trust me.
And I don't know, maybe there's special circumstances to the cryptography on their chain that don't apply the same way to confidential transactions. But, there is a certain amount of faith and trust that we put into the reputation of our elder core developers and such, that, if they ever did want to do something evil, or if there ever was one of them that was more advanced than the rest of them, they could sneak something in, and I don't feel that they're doing this. I think they're doing great work, but I also will at the same time say, and I've said for many years, that anybody who's trying to change Bitcoin in any way, the first way to think of them is that they're doing an attack on Bitcoin. I tell people they shouldn't run the latest version of Bitcoin Core because it just hasn't been in the wild. Like security, this is security software in a way, and why would you ever run the latest version of a security software,
It's true. You're absolutely right. Even because I work in troubleshooting, and of course we don't even recommend people use the most recent version of the software, So
yeah, it's kind of like I remember back in the day when I was working at a newspaper or other businesses, when there'd be a new version of Windows that comes out. It seemed to happen so much anymore. But, when we had Windows XP, and then we had Windows ME and Windows 2000 and Windows 7 and all these changes, it was like a huge deal for a large company to upgrade Windows and change. They had really hardened into the old software with a lot of security protocols and, permissions across the company and integrations with business partner software, that it's a real pain in the ass to update. And someday that's how it's going to be with Bitcoin too, this is why we have a base layer. This is why we try to say we don't want to be forking Bitcoin. One of the reasons, because it's very disruptive when people actually start building stuff on it.
Okay, so you bring up two interesting two interesting points. One of them, okay, so are you for or against ossification at the base layer? I personally am for ossification from what I understand currently. It doesn't mean that I'm also sounding like a politician, but to be honest, if you're smart enough to know that you don't know things, then you're smart enough to know your opinion can change. So for me, it's like, based on the information I have, I'm for ossification.
I will say that I'm technically for it, but that only because that's not how I look at it. I actually don't believe in hard forks. I think the concept as we know it, what we call a hard fork, does not actually exist. It may exist for other coins because they're centralized, but for Bitcoin, it does not exist. If Bitcoin were to hard fork today, I can 100% guarantee you the old chain would persist regardless of the reason.
I totally agree.
So it has ossified, in my opinion. There's no way, even if you get consensus from people, a large amount of consensus, it will not be the super majority. It's going to be, somewhere above 50% maybe, or some, I don't know how they'll threshold it, but there's always going to be at least some assholes that want to mine the old chain just because it will cause confusion. I mean, if Bitcoin forked, it'll bring Roger Ver out of retirement in 20 years. It's like, oh shit, Bitcoin's finally forking. Let me go say that everybody should use the old Bitcoin and keep mining the old Bitcoin.
That's right. He can have his day in the sun.
Yeah.
Finally, he'll win, Okay, so, but you also brought up, all right, so ossification, you're for it, and I like your explanation because I do agree with that, because that is, like, the way I see it is Bitcoin is what it is. And to an earlier point that you made, and this may have been in a different conversation, but if some other coin comes along, how people make that false narrative about the longest chain, and you had tried really hard to dispel it, but for some reason people use this idiotic idea that if you have a coin that has a longer chain than Bitcoin, right? Like if Bcash would have the longest chain, all of a sudden it would become Bitcoin. Like that makes no sense.
No, it doesn't make any sense. I argued a lot about how my line was Bitcoin is not a crown.
Exactly.
It's a network, and any new network is just simply not Bitcoin because we already have a network called Bitcoin. And so it's just a silly notion to think that it's some kind of crown or like heavyweight title belt that somebody gets to wear because they achieve some kind of metric.
Exactly. Only Bitcoin gets to be Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So, but it also, the other topic, the other point that you made about Bitcoin security, I wanted to ask you, we see a lot of the, and I don't know if this was present back in 2013. I feel like it was. And the reason why I referenced 2013 is because that's before my time. But I see a lot of people mentioning quantum computing as a possible threat vector. And of course, anytime I see somebody mention quantum computing, if you go take a look at their profile and you start to dig, they're usually some shitcoiner that believes in some other ledger that will be able to defeat quantum computing. But anybody who I mean, I don't know if you've ever used the website gsr.com, but they kind of have it's like a password hasher. So you could sit there and, let's say, theoretically type in 24 seed words, and you'd find out how many years it would take to break that seed, okay? Through different methods. And if you ask me, I think quantum computing is complete bullshit. Like, I'm not saying that the idea of quantum computing is bullshit. I'm saying that the idea that quantum computing will destroy Bitcoin is bullshit.
So this is a bit above my pay grade, but I'll say that
Me too.
I try to have I've had this conversation not recently, but in the past with people at that pay grade, and their general feeling is that quantum is pretty far off in any practical way. Quantum computing ruining Bitcoin is the least of our problems when it does come. Basically, all encryption would be all current encryption would be potentially compromised. So it's a much bigger issue than Bitcoin. But what I will say is Bitcoin has a funny way, and the Bitcoin developers have a funny way of always figuring out how to do what needs to be done without a hard fork. And I think that's why you're asking, because you're saying to make Bitcoin quantum resistant would require a hard fork, as far as most people say. But with what's recently happening with Lightning and when I'm kind of some of the things conversations I'm having with people about what's actually possible on a second layer, I feel like there's probably going to be a scheme, if it's ever needed, where we'll figure out how to do something through a soft fork, or where everybody kind of migrates their value onto a second, or a second layer, or an alternate second layer, or there's going to be some kind of way to kind of protect yourself with new addresses, or on a new type of encryption type, or something like that. Now, again, I'm speaking ignorantly on this. I just feel like it's probably not going to be a problem anytime soon, maybe not even in my lifetime. And it's nothing I have any power to do anything about. So it's just not, to me, that makes it kind of less interesting.
I completely agree. I think it's a moot point because it's nothing that we can actually control right now. Yeah. I mean, so I totally agree.
And this makes me think also when people like to talk about mining attacks or attacks on Bitcoin, and I like to say that, well, they're all glass hammers. Anytime you use an attack on Bitcoin, somebody is going to, if you're going to do it in any way that actually is worth something, somebody's going to notice that you use that glass hammer, and that glass hammer will break. And that means that, like, even if you 51% attack Bitcoin, well, the moment you exercise that power, everybody's going to know, and that's going to make Bitcoin worthless, or have a patch, or fork, or do something as a reaction to maintain and survive. So I think any attack on Bitcoin is only going to be something that causes a moment of volatility, and not necessarily kill it. I don't think you can actually kill Bitcoin.
I completely agree, because I mean, to a certain extent, I mean, I'm in the worst case scenario, I will always run my node. I don't really care. Like for me, it's to your point, it's got these, Bitcoin has these diehards that in the end, somebody, Bitcoin can't be killed because we won't let it die.
Well, this probably goes to why people like Roger Ver want people to believe in narratives like, if you have the most users, or you're the most P2P cash, or you are the cheapest transaction fees, or you have the longest chain, even though it's on a separate network, whatever it is, they try to make a kind of metric that means that this thing should be called Bitcoin. I think the reason why they try to perpetuate that narrative is that that's the only way to actually kill Bitcoin, is to get everybody to agree to move their value somewhere else.
That's exactly right. And so if they can somehow sway the hearts and minds, which is what is needed, then they can do that. But I don't see it happening. I mean, just from my own experience of going through the shitcoin rabbit hole and coming out I wouldn't say a Bitcoin maximalist necessarily, but I'd say a Bitcoin majorist. And I say that not because I believe in any other store of value other than Bitcoin. I don't, but I know that other people do. So
yeah, I mean, you've probably seen me say I don't believe that Bitcoin will ever be the only money. I don't believe it'll ever be the only cryptocurrency, honestly.
Exactly.
Because there's a tribal aspect to this stuff, and there's always going to be competition, and competition is probably actually healthy. If we didn't have Roger Ver, harping at us for 2 years about block size, something would have happened differently, and it would have taken longer, or happened in a less powerful way. I don't know. It seems like the opposite is true, where shitcoins and shitcoiners mostly waste Bitcoin time and waste resources and slow Bitcoin down. But it's tricky. When you have something that is exhibiting such anti-fragile traits as Bitcoin does, you sometimes have to wonder if it isn't better to slap Bitcoin in the face to make it do something, instead of have faith in it and just hodl and sit there.
Oh yeah. Oh no, I totally agree. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, let me ask you this: do you have any do you have any final thoughts or anything? Because just we're coming up on an hour, and to be honest, I could actually ask you a million questions, but just your time is important, and I really appreciate that you came on to speak with me about this. I really do. So do you have any final thoughts or anything?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I guess current topics are. Well, there's a lot of this people wanting to lend their Bitcoin, and you probably heard me say, just in general, be careful with letting other people hold your Bitcoin. You manage to get some, think twice about whether you let somebody else hold it for you. Exchanges are for exchanging; they're not for banking. The exchanges are going to try really hard to become banks, and they're going to try to be your bank and make you feel safe. But there's other attack vectors at play with crypto that are different than fiat, because it only goes one way. It's a push payment instead of a pull payment. There's no chargebacks. There's no undo button. When your Bitcoins are deleted, they're deleted. And exchange can't stop that. So it's better off holding them yourself. Well, as long as you don't delete them yourself.
Well, you know what? You bring up a good point, and I'm sorry, I actually meant to ask you about that, because obviously we're hearing a lot more commercials for BlockFi and Celsius Network, and to me, when I first heard about these, all I heard was BitConnect, Davercoin, USA Tech, but then you look at the players, right? And now the players have changed. The players aren't the BitConnects. Right? Like now the players have nice suits and they come from, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is the only difference between scamming and ignorance is proving intent. And BlockFi, I'm not trying to say they're scamming anybody. I don't know whether they're scammers. I have no way to prove it. I don't have evidence or any reason to say that. But the behavior they're exhibiting is not very distinguishable from a Ponzi scheme or a scammer. And they may be running a Ponzi scheme unintentionally. Like when I quizzed him about whether they had a formula for calculating the rate or what their plan was for the rate, he didn't have any answers. His plan seems to basically, Zach is who I'm talking about. Yeah. His plan seems to be get a bunch of people to let me hold your Bitcoin, and then promise them a percentage return on that Bitcoin. Not even promise them. Advertise that we may give them a percentage return if they let me hold their Bitcoin, and then figure out what the hell to do with all this Bitcoin to make money later, or these customers. And so that, if you go back to like Trendon Shavers, who did the Bitcoin Ponzi scheme that the SEC actually cracked down on, and he, got in a lot of trouble for that. He did the same thing. He promised people returns. He promised much higher returns and daily rates and such. He promised people higher returns. His intention seemed to actually be to use people's Bitcoin to make more Bitcoin. And then he didn't. He was incapable of actually delivering, and so people lost money, and he lost their Bitcoins instead. And that's what has me concerned with things like BlockFi is they're going to have pressure to profit eventually. They're burning money. They're buying a lot of advertising, a lot of expensive advertising. It's got to be expensive just to have the infrastructure and team to be able to hold $35 million of Bitcoin for people. And they're going to have a lot of pressure to put that Bitcoin to work. And putting Bitcoin to work is usually the most dangerous thing you can do with it.
I totally agree. I completely agree. And actually so I always like to believe that a service like this, would one day exist, because of course every person wants to grow their Bitcoin. It is a beautiful narrative, right? Give me your Bitcoin, don't do anything, and then I'll give you more Bitcoin.
Yeah, but this is typically associated very, very tightly with scams.
Exactly.
But I will say this. There is utility in letting people take loans out on their crypto. Now, yes. I don't think it's something everybody should do. I definitely don't think you should do it to speculate. In other words, I don't think you should take your Bitcoin, borrow take $100,000 of Bitcoin, borrow $100,000 on that Bitcoin, and then buy more Bitcoin with it. You're taking some huge risks, or trade shitcoins with the money and let your Bitcoin sit there. You're eventually going to lose it all. But there is utility because of the way taxes work for people that want to do investing in fiat with their Bitcoin. So like if you say you have $100,000 in Bitcoin and you want to invest $50,000 in a company, but you don't want to have to sell that Bitcoin and generate a taxable event, well, you can put that Bitcoin into something like BlockFi or someone that will take your Bitcoin as collateral, and they'll give you a loan, and then you can use that loan money to invest in that business. But essentially, you are choosing to sell that Bitcoin. You're just trying to sell that Bitcoin without taking a tax hit.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also, I don't know if you know much about Celsius Network, but that was started by Alex Mashinsky, who, if I'm not mistaken, is the creator of the VoIP protocol. So, I mean, he comes from a very technical background, and he does something very similar to BlockFi. You can go and get, fiat loans against your Bitcoin that you store there. So yeah,
the problem with this is that while I see utility in it, and there's definitely a purpose for it,
there's huge risk.
The purpose is more tailored towards people who have a lot of experience managing their finances. But BlockFi is not being advertised to those people. It's being advertised to crypto Twitter and shit.
That's right.
So I hate the idea that somebody could only ever do a certain thing with their money if they were quote unquote accredited or such. But there is a reason why that even came to be as a concept. It's because without that concept, people that don't know about complex financial instruments will end up getting fleeced. So it's a tricky thing to decide where regulation is too far, and the reality is that regulation does exist, and we do live with it, and I don't see it going away anytime soon. And so, that will fall into crypto behavior as well. So I do wonder, I don't know what country or state BlockFi is originated in, but I do wonder if they're following proper advertising to Americans. There's a lot of regulation about how you can advertise financial opportunities and instruments to Americans, and how you do that, and whether it's registered and done properly. I do wonder if they're staying true to that. I do wonder if they're actually allowed to do what they're doing to unaccredited investors. But in the end, I don't care about the regulatory details. All I care about is that I do feel like there are people that are going to put their money in there and potentially lose it or not understand the risks. I don't like to see Pomp retweeting a referral link saying earn 6% on your Bitcoin. That's not how you that's not a ethical means of promoting that product,
No, I agree, but he's he's managed to convince himself that it's all good. So
yeah, I mean, I don't think I don't have any reason to know that he's a scammer necessarily.
Oh no, absolutely not.
I just think maybe there's a higher ethical behavior that people could be having than they currently do. And the greed may blur that out of their consciousness.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. So I was gonna say, is there anything else? So I'm gonna just so you know, I'm gonna put in the show notes. I'm gonna put a link to to BitRefill, and if somebody wants to contact you, what's the best way to reach you?
I mean, the best way to reach me is probably on Twitter. I'm on Twitter and on Telegram as @BitcoinErrorlog. I work at bitrefill.com, and we provide digital gift vouchers for, I don't know, maybe 1,500 different products if you include the mobile phone top-ups that we do as well. We're in the process of adding literally hundreds of new products. We're adding Netflix, a bunch of big name brands from the US and throughout the world. We have a lightning announcement coming up hopefully in the next couple weeks. just a lot of stuff cooking. We're in active conversations with some of your favorite Bitcoin companies on ways to work together with them to do more things with Lightning and other products and integrations. There's just a lot going on. So please, I appreciate all of your support, even if it's just reading my trolley tweets, or especially, shopping at Bitrefill and giving me feedback about that and helping with that. But keep on living the Bitcoin dream.
Cool. Thank you so much, John. Again, thank you so much for coming on the show and taking your time. I truly find talking to you is really awesome. And, I'm sure you got lots of other folks to see if you ever come to Boston, but man, I would love to actually do a show with you in person.
Well, I'll probably be in New York for Consensus. I'm originally from Massachusetts, so I don't know if I'll visit family at the same time, but maybe bug me around then and we can hang out.
Okay, cool, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, take it easy.
You too. Bye.
Bye. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed my interview discussion with John Carvalho. I know I did. It was such a pleasure to talk with him and just to get to pick his brain. It's a lot of times you find yourself when you're researching Bitcoin. It's interesting, right? There's so many Bitcoiners, but yet you find yourself in this lonely position where you're doing a lot of research on your own and you create this kind of this vacuum chamber for yourself, and it's just really amazing to get to speak to others and get their point of view, and especially somebody like him who's really just seen so much of what Bitcoin has done. Anyways, so yeah. That does it for us. That does it for episode 15. If you want to reach out to me on Twitter, I'm at CoinIcarus. By email, you can reach me at funwithcrypto@protonmail.com. And John's contact information, his Twitter information, is going to be in the show notes. Catch you all next time.